Right, welcome everyone. Welcome. Very excited to have you all here. We are super happy to be able to help to organize this sort of thing, sort of meetup. It's the first time we do it. Hopefully, the first of many. But I get right in because we've got quite a lot to cover. So when we talk about Laravel, most of us like to promote the rapid application development aspect of it. It's so good. It's so powerful. It's battery included. We can do a lot of things with it. But efficiency can become chaos if you don't really reflect on how you organize your things or how things take shape after a few months, a few years sometimes, and the patterns in the code organization as well can be quite challenging. So in the next 45 minutes or so, maybe 50, I want to try to share with you a little bit of what we've been learning, seeing, what I've been personally seeing as well in my career, and the practices that maybe help you maintain your systems as well. So I'm Clem, this is me, this is Taylor, this is Mark, my ex-colleague. I've been contributing to Laravel in PEST recently for PEST 4, and I have joined Infomaniak 6 months ago. So a little bit about Infomaniak. So who are we? We like to call ourselves the ethical cloud. What does that mean, really? Well, it just means that we try to be sensible of the things we do. What you can see on the right-hand side is a picture of our latest data center, the DC4, number 4. This data center is using very large heat exchangers to collect the heat from all the servers we have running underground below like a block of flats, essentially. And we reuse that heat to heat the flat above. Simple, kind of stupid, but simple and actually fairly efficient. We also do hot water with it. It's to myself, I think it's quite groundbreaking to see that, and we have other plans as well to try to make our impact as little negative as possible on the planet. So we think about the planet. This is what we call ourselves ethic. Everything is Swiss made. We employ locally. We like to make use of the local economy as well, and we respect your privacy as well. So this is another part of the ethic work kind of thing. But not only, we just recently got certified B Corp, which simply means that we care about both our social and environmental impact as well. So it includes things like inclusion, diversity, carbon footprints, and these things are very important to us. By the way, if you're looking for a new opportunity, we're always looking for devs. If you love Laravel and if you're up for a new challenge, technical challenges, we've got plenty of that. Join us to help build the ethical cloud of tomorrow. So you may know us from a few of our flagship products. We've got the K Suite, we call it, which includes collaborative tools like Mail, Calendar, K-Drive, K-Chat, K-Meet. We also have Swiss Transfer, and actually we have more products. We have a lot of hosting and server-based cloud-based products. Like you can buy domain names as a certificate with us. You can have a website with Node.js hosted with us, or PHP. You can have a VPS. You can have even your Kubernetes infrastructure with us. You can have your database with us. You can have a lot of things with us on the cloud. So if you're looking for a provider that is in Switzerland, well, here you go. So Infomaniak, a little bit about us in terms of our history. It's a 30 years old company. When you think about it, 30 years old in our industry, it's quite old, but in a good way. It means we've got experience, right? We went from an IT club. It started with a handful of people into a computer shop selling computers. And then we started to become an ISP provider, providing internet, because we're like, oh, this thing, internet in the 90s, oh, it looks cool, right? It's promising. And then we started to host things in our servers, build servers. And then we were like, oh, we need some kind of admin panels to manage all of this, like cPanel-like things. We started to, I think they started with ASP.NET, then this quickly switched to PHP 3 at the time, which is quite old. So at the time, you have to remember, we had no frameworks, barely any framework, no namespaces, no composer. You had to download a zip file to install a framework or any kind of tool. We had to build our home autoloader. That meant we had to build our own ORM. We had to even build a templating engine based on XML, and everything was custom made pretty much. A lot of global, a lot of static, no types, obviously. And we had to switch from SVN to Git at some point. Probably before that was tapes, I guess, or something like that. But at some point they realized, well, we need to start putting order and standards into things, and they started to build their first API 12 years ago using Laravel 4 Beta 5, which is, funny enough, approximately the same time I started to use Laravel. So 6 months in, you said, right? How do you know all of this? Like, well, believe it or not, you spend a lot of time, a ridiculous amount of time reading code. Like, this is taking time. Maybe you don't notice it, maybe you do. But yeah, you do read code a lot when you troubleshoot things or whatever. Someone quite clever said that any fool can write code that computer can understand, but a good programmer will write code that human can understand as well, and actually better. And even with AI nowadays, I still think this is viable. I still think I don't see ourselves being out of the equation. It's gonna be a tool that we will probably have to master and use, but I don't see ourselves being out of the equation. So even nowadays, an AI agent will actually parse your code base and try to make sense of it. So readability, it's still something that's fairly important, I think. And it's also the foundation of things. When you think about it, the application you build, it's built with letters and words and variables, and all of these things are read by someone, either you, a machine, or your next colleague. That's important. So what can you do to help on readability? You can start by thinking, well, I can remove some dead code. What I call dead code is, well, you can see here you've got comments. It's absolutely useless. The interpreter doesn't care. You don't care. You've got the Git history. If you really need that, let's get rid of it. Unreachable code would be like a return statement, actually prevents the execution. You don't have anything there after this that can be executed. Well, the same thing, remove that. It's not even used. Abandoned code would be like an argument in a function list. Like a function has a list of arguments. One argument is not used anymore. Get rid of it. And the last one is the trickiest one. The logic-based dead code would be like a whole function or something that is not even used or called anymore because the input in the variables doesn't apply, doesn't compile properly and doesn't actually need it anymore. That one is tricky, but it's also dead code. The comments as well, talking about commented code, well, comments are also another good thing. Try to avoid this kind of comment. Reduce from 400 to 100. Well, thanks. I've got Git for that. So I often say, try to reach for comments if it's like the last resort. It will force you to actually think about how can I make this bit of code simpler or more readable, or actually easier to understand, so I don't actually need a comment. Try to think about that. If you can't, well, reach for a comment, but try to keep it as a last resort. Also, a misleading comment is actually worse than no comments at all, I think, in my opinion. Well, going on production with an assumption that something works this way because there's a comment buried from 5 years ago that says something can be dangerous, so be careful with that. And also, it clutters the code. Like, it is essentially things that you may not need. Another thing, we all have seen this, the pyramid of if else that goes on and on and on and on until forever. Try to avoid that. And there are a few techniques to avoid these things. You want to essentially go back to going to the first level of the indentation in your code, essentially. So it will be easier for the brain because you can stop very early and it will just simplify things for you, and it will be easy to read and it will simplify things for you. So notice there's a break here that actually is not even closed. There's a return here. So get rid of that. Also, you've got a return. Well, you notice that there's already an early return you can do, because if you're an admin, well, you override it. You don't need to care about whatever is going on after this. Your brain stops to read, and that's it. Much easier. And then the next step will be, okay, here we've got a return false. That is the last resort, the last thing that my thing does. But actually here I've got a break. Well, if I flip them over, that's it. I can simplify the code. And now you can easily realize that this bit can be one-lined. You can just have one line for this. And now with PHP modern syntax, you can also convert this into a match statement, which is even better and even easier to read. So, beautiful. So this is a massive controller, a ridiculous controller. That is very, very long. It's not from our code base, I promise, but it's very long. It places an order, it does like model manipulation, it does validation all the way at the top, it does coupon management. It does a ridiculous amount of things. It's checking the stocks and creating the order, shipping at the address, like payment gateway, notification mail logs. Yeah, stop it, right? So the first thing you can do when you see that, you want to break up big blocks. So what you can do is using the first tool in your utility tool belt called functions. Why? Because here you can see we've already transformed a few of these things. We've identified the logic, essentially. We've tried to make sense of it. So, okay, the first thing we do, we check the user is banned or not. Then we check the inventory for each item. Then we calculate the total price. Then we apply the discount if the coupon's provided. It goes on and on, but at least you've started to make sense of it, right? And you've created function every time to move away from the unbearable blob of code. Doing that does one thing that is very important. It creates affordance. Affordance to me is like when you see a door handle like this one, your brain doesn't even need to think about the door handle. Like it knows already how to use it. You know that you're gonna put your hand on it, you're gonna press downwards, and you're gonna push the door, and then you open the door. That's it. Your brain, you don't have to think how to open it. So affordance is essentially trying to speak to your future self and or colleague or someone and be like, this is what it does. And yeah, it is literally trying to give hints to brains, essentially. So here we've got functions and they create affordance, and it's great for maintainability and readability. And it gives also a bit of abstraction. Well, I'll come back to the abstraction. So the rule of three, you probably all know this, but if I give you 2 and 4, can somebody try to guess the next number? Anyone? It could be 8, 6. But what if I tell you it's 16, actually? Now you might start thinking, okay, I think I know what's going on. I think we're using the square function, 2 square, 4 square, 16 square. So you might be able to guess, okay, the next number is 256. Yeah, okay. What you realize is before that point, you were unable to actually, this point, you were unable to actually really guess properly what was going on. You need at least 2 or 3 or even 4 sometimes data points to be able to say, okay, now I know where we're going, now I know the logic, I think that I can abstract, right? So this is just a hint to be like, repetition is not too bad. Repetition can cost less than the wrong abstraction. If you start abstracting straight away at this point, then it might be too early and you might do something that is going to be hard to move away from later on. So it's not a bad thing. Repetition is not necessarily a bad thing until if it's to wait for the right moment. And then another thing I wanted to highlight is the fact that sometimes short doesn't necessarily mean more readable. Like here, we've got our hands a bit full with a lot of things going on. We've got a ternary operation, like a few conditions, and you've got worker options. Well, you try to use that it goes a bit too far in terms of trying to make things short. If you start by already having some formatting to help you, you can already see that there's a primary action, and then there's a fallback, right? So the primary action comes from the job where we grab the timeout if it's available. Otherwise, we've got a fallbacks coming from the options. And then, well, you can actually use an early return here where you're going to use the early return, the fallback first. Otherwise, keep your primary action at the root of your code base. So it's the definite thing that you want to do. And you can go even further by asking yourself, can I natively, is there something in the framework or in the language that I can use to make it even more readable? Yes, there's this optionable getter, forgot the name, to actually grab the timeout from the job instantly. So even more readable now. Another good trick is using objects. We've all seen these sort of things, ridiculous amount of arguments in the functions. I'm sure people are familiar with it. You've got like magic strings going on, like notify, you've got arrays, optional things sometimes or not, like it's what? If you start using objects, it's going to start making sense. Here we go, a user model. A user model has got attributes, right? We've got attributes that could be an email, whatever, string-based, but everything is handled within the model, right? You don't have to care. We have to be able to use the object, but it's already there for you to be used. Same thing with an enum. Here we don't have a magic string anymore. The notify thing is within the user action as a, like the case of an enum. Same thing with the configuration. You've got a value object or a DT you can pass. These things can help you to streamline ridiculous argument lists in your functions as well. So just to sum up quickly on the readability chapter, we've understood that readable doesn't really mean shorter. Optimized doesn't necessarily mean too smart as well. Avoid the condition pyramids that are unbearable. The guard clauses and the early returns can help you for that. And keep things simple doesn't necessarily mean everything in the controller. It's simpler, yes, to code because I'm coding everything in the same file. But is it simple? Probably not. Is it easy to maintain? Probably not. A quick note on tooling, because I could do a whole talk about tooling. Tooling will help you to make it consistent. So, like one trick I really like to use, and Laravel has been doing that lately as well, is to use composer scripts to be able to have scripts out of the box. I love to be able to clone a repo of any app and just run composer run tests, and that runs my test for me. I don't need to care about how this thing is set up or what kind of things, like everything is there, composer run tests, I'm happy. Formatting, if you have to pick one battle in terms of the tooling world, I would highly suggest to start with the formatting because it will help on the readability aspects and the consistency of your code base. It will help you to industrialize things because you're going to be able to have all of that into a pipeline. But be careful with pipelines. Pipelines can be too much. It can be over-engineered, or it can be too slow. You can have too much going on. Sometimes you even have checks. You have checks that don't really make sense to you because they are failing, but nobody cares. So you're like, should we do it? Probably not. Like, try to postpone that to the right moment you actually need this and enforce it and get it green rather than being failed and ignored by everyone. You're going to lose time, money if you host this on a cloud provider. Like, yeah. So pick your battle and try to balance it right and make sure it works for you. Oops, sorry. Here we go. Next is about conventions and standards. A little bit about that. We all know that. It's just a refresher for probably most of you, but there are some people out there very clever who have been putting together things like PSR, RFCs, and for example, when you think about Laravel, the directory structure you get out of the box, the naming conventions you get, these things have been put together by people already, and they will save you time if you use them. You're going to be able to avoid on the complexity aspect and the predictability you're going to get out of it. That is gold because you could even, use it to hire more people that know already these things, and you don't have to train them. So that's a big win. There are standards for RESTful or JSON API, like kind of the way you want your API to behave. And yeah, you can decorate or extend these things, but try not to. Like it's one standard, like a convention more that I really like, that is from the talk I'll link down in the resources. It's called Credit by Design. So it's from Adam Wadham, the guy who created Tailwind. I don't know if anybody saw that talk before, but I still find it very insightful. It's from 2016 or 17, but it's still I still like it. So this is basically just saying, when you think about controllers, we've seen that horrendous controller back then. It's ridiculous, right? It's got quite often you have custom actions like this one, check in the flight controller or list passengers, right? This is a very custom one. When I say custom, it just doesn't fit in the 7 default actions you get out of a controller with Laravel out of the box. So what this means is essentially, well, anything can be CRUD if you think about it. Like if you think about resources, because we like REST, like here we're talking about passengers. They are passengers of a flight, right? That means I could probably think about a flight passengers controller that would have an index function that will then list your passengers for a given flight. That starts to make more sense, and you can see the route is going to be updated to flight passengers controller index. So you end up with a maximum of 7 controller actions. If you use like a web UI and you have your views in your app, if you use an API, you only have 5, and that's it. That's the maximum number of actions you can have in a controller. Tops. That's it. Anything else can be turned into another controller. So let's take another example. Flight controller. Okay, we still have the same flight controller, but it's got a publish and unpublished thing. So here we have essentially a state change, right? And a state change can also be represented as a resource if you think about it with REST. So the resource would be here, a published flight. A published flight is a resource. yeah, it's fine. It doesn't exist as a model in my app, but it is actually, if you think about it as a resource for REST, yeah, that works. And then that means you can have your published flight controller. So your posts, when you unpublish, becomes a delete of a published flight. That's the nuance. And then you have your publish, which is the same. So unpublished becomes destroy, and yeah, a UI concept as well, like a cover image. You have a cover image on your flight booking, whatever. That also can be a resource on its own. You can have a route that would say, actually, the cover image is a sub resource of my flight, and I've got a flight cover image controller that I'm going to update with. I'm going to update my image, rather than before we had an update cover image action on the flight's controller, which is very custom. And the last example is about pivot tables. So when you have many-to-many relationship, you're going to end up with a pivot table. That you can also represent this with a resource. So here, when you have a user that comes and say, for example, I want to subscribe to my updates for my flight because I want to be on time and I don't want to miss the door where the door is in the airport. Well, you're going to subscribe to it, and by doing that, you're creating, well, a subscription, right? So the subscription will represent the thing that you're doing now, which is associating yourself to a flight through that subscription entity, model, whatever you want to call it. And that makes it much easier to have it represented with routes, because now you have a post when you subscribe, and you have a delete when you remove your subscription from it. You're removing from it. So you can also go further and rename the flight user table that you had with your many-to-many relationship into a subscription table. Yeah, why not? If you do that, you just need to make sure that you update the relationships, but that's totally doable. And you can also use one of the great classes from Laravel called the pivot relations class. Instead of extending the model, you're going to create a new subscription model, and that's going to extend the pivot thing, the pivot class. And now you end up with a real domain concept in your app. You had subscribers on the flight that were users. Well, now actually you tell them to just use the subscriptions relationship through the subscriptions many-to-many table now. And that is something you can use throughout your application as a thing. I've got a model, well, it's a subscription between a user and a flight. Here, flight and user might not be the most relevant in my example, but you could have this with whatever objects you've got in your applications. And one thing to remember, a controller file costs nothing. Like having 5 controller files instead of one that does so many things, actually, it might help you in terms of maintainability and readability. So, yeah, it will prevent a controller to balloon into this enormous beast that you've seen before. It can help you, at least, with that. One thing I wanted to quickly touch on is the static aspect of PHP. We've all been using it, which is fine, and it's used in Laravel as well. If you think about the str helper kind of eliminate support str class, everything is static in there. It takes as an argument a string, it manipulates it, and it returns a string, which is fine. But when you start using it with kind of complexity, business logic, and dependencies, well, that's a problem. Like, you're going to end up in a scenario like here, for example, you expect 2 users on one product. Well, no, actually, you have 3 of each, because the memory in PHP will keep the static context there, and it's not going to reset things the way you expect with normal objects. So it's something that we have problem with when working with like Octane or OpenSWORD or like things like that, where the context doesn't get reset, because the concurrency aspect means your application is always running, right? So it keeps running, and then you have issues like that. So it creates this sort of like global state that sticks in memory. It's hard to manage. It's very hard to test as well, to mock things like that. It's kind of annoying. You have no objects, so no instances, and obviously it's hard to use it with the IC container and the dependency injection. You've got some sort of tight coupling going on. And yeah, so if you're looking for like something that can handle the complexity, the business logic that you want to have in there, or something like that, go with OOP, start having classes, instantiate your classes, and that's my advice. And if you like the syntactic sugar of this colon notation, well, there are something called the facades, and we all use them, and they are pretty amazing, to be honest. I love them. Let's take an example quickly. So we've got the auth facade that we've all been using, I'm sure once, not one, probably more in our life. This returns the currently logged in user. When you think about it, what does this do? Well, it goes through the authentication layer, it uses the user provider, it goes through the database layer, and then use the query builder to build a SQL query, which then use the manager to actually select a database driver, which will then establish a connection to run your query and all in all. So it does a lot, but it's okay. Like the Laravel team has been making sure that it's tested, that it works, it says what it says in the tin, like it does what it says in the tin. And it's not static at all. Everything is, if you look at the wiring, which I encourage you to have a look at one time, it's very clever the way it works with the IOC container and the dependency injection. It's not static at all. It's usually bound to a concrete implementation, which will be whatever class you decide. It could be a manager, it could be a service or whatever. And then this can depend on other classes as well. You can have dependencies added to it, which will be manageable. And it will essentially give you a building block which you can use throughout your application very easily. And it's also very amazing for testing. So you could isolate this and use the facade and test it in the test. And once you have that tested and covered, you can very, very easily mock it. So my facade does something, well, I just mock it and I expect that my function is called. As long as I've tested my facade in another test in isolation, I can just mock it very simply in my other test that I use that. So if you're full of syntactic sugar, that's a good hit. Another quick win is the macro. I don't know if anyone is familiar with it, but sometimes I quite like to use them, especially to decorate the str helper class, for example. If you need a new function to do something that is not really supported, why not? Like, it's dead easy. You can test it as well, and it's quite nice in terms of the syntax, and it works. And so I'm not always reaching for that, but it can be a good tool to have in your toolbit as well. And funny enough, I was surprised to discover that 40 components in the Laravel core, 40 components are macroable. So you can extend things without having to, create a full class that extends something and then declare and wire it with the IOC container. That's a good thing, I think. But don't abuse it, obviously. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the validation. So we've seen the other controller, the validation is ridiculous and it's living in the controller, and obviously form requests, we all love them. It will give you a few handles, a few quick wins essentially. You can have the authorization layer there, obviously the rules of validation, the custom messages you want if you want to, and also custom validation. But not only, you can also decorate that with other functions. Why not? Go crazy. Like if you have details in your app and you have an order detail, your request could easily have a function that you've coded that will transform the payload of your requests, so all the things you receive, into an order detail. And you just call that function anywhere you need, in your controller maybe, or any other classes, and then it returns the detail for you. It handles that kind of transformation aspect between the two layers. You can have a formatting thing, like let's say you have a phone, like a phone entry, a phone input. Well, I need it to be formatted from the request. Just for this request, I'm going to format this way. Might be a bad example, but yeah, you get the gist. That is something that you can extend, and it's quite nice. It's very easy to test as well. You usually test these through a feature test, but yeah. And then the reusability aspect, the composability is really nice as well, because you can have that in a form request in a web kind of route, if you have a web UI, but you can reuse probably the same in an API layer as well. And then boom, you have something that is being reused and already makes sense, and you're really happy to be able to reuse that, and you know that it's covered and in terms of testing and all of that. When you need custom validations, I always try to avoid having very complicated and cumbersome validation rules like in my form request. I like to use a dedicated class that I just instantiate and call whenever I need, like valid flight number rule. That way you can also test this single rule in an isolation, in a test that I just test this, and you can reuse it as well in another test, in another form request, sorry, if you need that. Or even without form request, if you use the validated facade, for example, you can still reuse that rule, and that makes another what I call the low level building blocks that will help you to get some like I don't know, consistency and reusability and composability in your app. And the last thing I wanted to highlight was the fact that we get validation for free without even realizing it sometimes. The route model binding is amazing. It will tell you essentially that, well, here, it gives you the podcast out of the box if you have like a route that calls an action that will then expect the podcast, fine. But if you have a sub resource, like here we have an episode, that belongs to a podcast, essentially, you can use the scope bindings, which I'm sure you're aware of, but you can use the scope bindings to actually have this other additional layer of validation that will say, make sure the episode belongs to the podcast when I'm gonna update it or here delete the episode. I don't want to delete the episode from another podcast, right? So that is validation still. We don't realize it sometimes when we use it, but that is already validation that you don't have to put inside your app and clutter your logic with. It's already for free. Another thing I wanted to talk about is the data transformation aspect. We all have seen, I'm sure we all had this need. As soon as you start shipping APIs or consuming APIs, you're going to start to realize that, well, I need to transform this data from whatever database or API I'm using into something that I can understand and I want to use. You're going to reach for that. It's a need almost everyone has, and it's quite important. So you have out of the box with Laravel, obviously, the JSON resources, which are pretty nice. Usually you use this for egress, like things that are going out of your application to the world. You can also have simple transformer classes, like with just a transformer method that transforms something from the output, fine. DTOs, value objects, absolutely fine too. Custom collections could be could be interesting for that. They are essentially extending the default collection from Eloquent or even the support one with your custom methods. You can have a method in there that will summarize for you the stats of a given flight, for example. Enums are actually a good way to transform the data to, like here, if you think about it, I've got a server status, right? And it's a string-based enum. It has a case called online. And also every case is in my enum can be transformed into a visual representation of an icon. And that will probably give you like a URL or an image or something, a path that you can use in your UI to actually represent the online status. That is transformation, data transformation too. Enums are amazing. And usually all of these are quite tightly coupled with API documentation. You can see on the image, it's one of our internal tools that we've built that will essentially use something we've built as well called the normalizers, which will essentially let you define how your objects will represent. You can also have validation rules on top of it. It uses form requests as well. And then that generates open API spec files, which we then glue together and build our full-blown API documentation with it. So API documentation, very important if you ship APIs, obviously, and it goes back to the slide about the tooling, standardize your thing, try to automate things and all of that. Now, another thing you will need to do is querying. I'm sure we've all queried a database, probably, even a SQL, like a SQLite database. We all need to do that. And I like to start gradually in terms of abstraction with it. I like to start with just scopes, really. Like scopes are dead easy, very simple. You've got the local and global ones. So the only difference is that the local scopes, you will have to explicitly ask Eloquent, I want the provision server, give me that. It's explicit, but by default, I don't return them. Rather than the global scope is the other way around. The global scope will be like the soft deletes, for example. I don't return any soft deleted records to you, never, unless you explicitly ask for it. Or you can even have variants where I want actually both of them, both deleted and non-deleted. So scopes are quite powerful. It keeps your code dry fairly, and they are reusable as well. It's another low-level building block that you can reuse, throughout your application. It gives you flexibility as well. Now, the next step after this, I like to use custom builders, where you would have essentially you would sum up and like group together your scopes into a class. That's simple. It extends the normal builder class from Laravel, and you have the functions defined, and you can reuse that as well. The good thing is that it's the same syntax, absolutely the same syntax, exactly the same one. And you just need to tell your model, well, instead of using the normal builder, use mine, because I've got a few functions I'd like to use from there. So seamless integration with obviously all the relationships you've got going on. Like as soon as you've got a belongs to many and it returns normally a normal builder or whatever, that will be your builder, server builder class returned to you. But it works exactly the same way as long as you don't mess up with the normal builder functionality. And yeah, just remember here, the goal is to have blocks and things you can reuse, low-level building blocks, so you can have this abstraction available throughout the application. You have also a very good point here with the domain language that you're going to have in your scopes will be quite important in terms of affordance again. Like servers provisioned, instantly I know what's going on. I only grab the provisioned servers. It's dead easy, it's simple. The last thing, one of the last things I wanted to talk about are patterns. Now we're going up in the abstraction. I don't know if you noticed. We started from the very bottom, and now we're walking our way up to the higher spheres of abstractions. So 2 patterns, highly used, repository and services. I've started to use Laravel back in 2014, and at this time a lot of people came from a Symfony background. So I don't know if it's still the case, but at the time with Symfony you had to have, so they're using Doctrine, which is like another ORM. It's a data mapper 1 instead of Eloquent, which is a active record ORM. And with Doctrine you cannot do anything if you don't have a repository. Well, at the time it was true, I don't know if it's still true, but you had to code a repository that would essentially be your abstraction to CRUD. You would have create, read, update, delete operations, all of that would essentially talk to the database directly. It's one way to do it, but people got confused when they switched to Laravel because 2013, 14, it was still fairly new, and they were like, oh, I want to do the same thing and have this kind of repository approach. But that's an example of something that didn't work for me. So you have a get by ID, which effectively adds a layer of abstraction to something that doesn't need to be abstracted, which is my model. I already have my model that I can use with Eloquent. Why would I bother with a repository that does something I can already do with Laravel out of the box? So that was a bad example of something I've seen in the past that people tended to use. But then there are still, well, yeah, that's a good point actually. With the route model binding, you don't even need anything. Then your function ends up being empty because it resolves automatically the user from the route and it fetches it from the database from you. It knows what to do with it. So it's beautiful. So a good usage of a repository would be to have these CRUD operations still being abstracted to you, but for something that makes sense. To me, a package that wants to have the persistence layer abstracted and doesn't really know how you're going to fetch your users. Like this example is from the PHP League package, Auth2Serve package, where they just tell you, okay, this is the contract. This is a function, tell me how to fetch the users in whatever data layer. I don't care, just implement it and tell me how I can fetch all of that. That works in my opinion in terms of the repository. Also, if you have an external API and you want to try to, have ways to fetch data, update data to a distant API, that can work too. But as soon as you have Eloquent, well, not really. Don't think it's where it shines, to be honest. So yeah, a few pitfalls. They end up being complexity magnets as well. Like people start to mess up with, okay, I've got this update operation, but I also need to update another record that is associated. So I'm going to do that in my update function in my repository, and then it grows legs and it becomes unmaintainable and enormous. So avoid having a business logic if you stick with a repository pattern. Try to have that somewhere else. Keep it for the data layer access, and then have something else if you need to have more abstraction. Try to don't mix things. And yeah, another argument that also people were using a lot at the time, they were like, oh yeah, but we've got this pattern because if we switch from MySQL to Postgres, our CRUD operations are already abstracted. I've been doing this for quite some time, like almost 12 years now. I've never had to do it, like switch from MySQL to Postgres. Maybe some people have done it. I've never done it. I don't know if anyone has done it here. It's to me, it's not really a valid argument, but whatever. Service is the other one. So service, same thing, give you like an abstraction on the data aspect, of the data access thing. But the added thing compared to the repository is that you've got a domain manipulation capability with it. So here we've got an invoice service that can pay an invoice essentially. You can update your state in the domain, and then you have side effects and the logic, the business logic, fine, it can live here. I think it's okay. You can already start that here, the invoice repository, if I'm in an eloquent kind of context. I don't really need it. I'm just gonna use the model and update the model itself. I know like people in Symfony think like, oh, a model or an entity cannot save itself. Well, this is what we do. So yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the service. Though there is a good use case as well for the service where, yeah, if it's distant as well, you want a service to manage things, fine. You know, like you can have an API. It's also good. It can be an abstraction for this, but it can also be a very, like a big magnet for complexity again, where we've seen service classes with thousands lines of 20 plus functions doing enormous things coupled to a lot of dependencies, hard to test, it grows arms and legs, it's hard to maintain. And yeah, so you can use it, be mindful of that, be mindful that it's going to be the central point to do everything about a model sometimes, but yeah, try to balance things. Or you can try to think about another approach with another pattern, which I really like and I started to use about 6 months ago quite a lot, which is the action pattern, which is now actually supported out of the box with the artisan command make action. You can make actions, and an action is very simple. It's just to try to avoid having classes that balloons into enormous beasts. It just takes one action, isolates into a class, make it reusable, and yeah, it's very simple. Another benefit of it is that you're going to be able to open your folder structure and see all the actions your app is doing in a folder listed, rather than if you have a service class, you have to open the service and then look for all the function the service is doing, and then things are going in all the directions. That's a little bit more breathable, I want to say. So yeah, it's isolated, easy to test, and it's just what you need. So here you can see we've got a add user to team action, which does, well, an action is very simple. You've got a handle, or some people like to use the invoke function from PHP, which makes a class invocable. I like to use the handle function because it's like a job, you know, it's a convention in Laravel. I like to stick with that. You've got your entry inputs, if I want to say, and then your body of the action does something. It does something. It's the action. It's a good practice to wrap your things in a transaction because we do that anyway with services or any other classes, but I like to do that. And then you can also have hooks at the end. Like, I call them hooks, but they are essentially whatever events you want to broadcast or dispatch to let other things know that something happened. So for example, here, I'm going to dispatch a user added to team action with a few things, and it can be useful for other parts of your system as long as it's secondary and it's not, and the action you're going to do after this event should not belong here. Or if you have like a UI with notifications and you want instant feedback of something that happened, that can work as well. So like I said, it can be tested in isolation. So this is how you would use it. You would have your team users controller, and then you would use the dependency injection, the OEC container, to actually inject your action. And then you just call the handle method, and you pass the arguments you need. It allows you to clean up the controller and have things just looking neat, to be honest. You can use whatever with the handle method. Like, it's literally, it can be a DTO or the validated function from the request that only returns, like, you know, the validated data from the payload from the form request, whatever you like. And in terms of testing, well, it's that easy. You call your action and you instantiate it and you test your thing. That's very simple. Once you've tested your action in isolation, you can reuse it. Well, reuse it anywhere you like. It could be a command, like an artisan command. It could be a job. It could be anything. You can. Once again, it's a low-level building block you can reuse. So now you can reuse it. You don't necessarily have to test it. If you write a command with it, you can just mock it very easily like that. You expect your action to have to be called with the handle method Well, at least once maybe with a couple of arguments, whatever. But at the end of the day, you can mock it very easily. And once again, you can use the dependency injection to use it, and that will instantiate it, or not. If you want to create like instantiate with new, fine, it works as well. So that action can be reused, yeah, like I said, job, items, and commands, but also between your web and API layers. If you think about it, when you create a user, for example, when you add a user to a team, no matter if you do it from the web or if you do it from like an API endpoint, at the end of the day, I just want to add a user to a team, like fine, and yeah, that will be able to be reused. So that will improve on composability as well. So the action can call an action as well. And that is getting into interesting bits where an action, for example, here, we can use the dependency injection and inject that in here. And that will be able to pass along the action and handle, well, the things you need to handle within your action. What this causes is essentially create a sub-action that is depending on the first action. Always wrap things in transaction if you need to, and the good thing with that, it will shine when you can use the bubbling effect. So let's say you have two actions, one depends on the other. The create team action, it needs to actually assign an owner to the team when you create the team, because a team without an owner for you doesn't really make sense. Okay, cool, I'm gonna reuse my add user to team action, and when I do that and both of them are wrapped in transaction, if the transaction number 2 fails, well, my action is going to fail, and my transaction number 1 is going to fail, and my first action is going to fail as well, which means there's nothing committed in the DB, and all is good. Like, my transaction have prevented some corrupted data to enter my database, and that's actually where I think it quite shines. You can obviously do that with any, with any like other classes. If you have services, yeah, you use transaction the same way, fine. But I find the fact that you gave it a name, like you gave names to actions very clear, and the fact you've got these transaction wrapping things with like a blanket, I like that. I think it's quite neat. And the last thing I wanted to cover is the events. So I've mentioned the events in terms of like giving yourself a hook. That's good. But also the truth is about events, they don't really scale well. Like they are good for secondary things, but try to ask yourself, is it actually primary or secondary? Like, for example, here, we've got an event that is provision server, it's a server provision event that you're going to dispatch with the server, and that is going to be triggering a bunch of things. So you can see we add a DNS, configure the host name, configure the SSH, the times, and then it goes on and on and on. Are we going to provision a server without adding SSH? That means we can't access it. So, well, probably not. So if that's the case, move these things into your primary actions. They are like having this sort of like extra layers of, okay, I've got an event, but I need to look at where is dispatch. Okay, what kind of other thing is triggers? Who is listening to that? Okay, all these things. And then what do they do? It kind of is a bit convoluted, and it's like 2 or 3 navigation layers you add to the code in order to find out what's going on. So sometimes events can be prevented if you try to use them for like something primary. Well, maybe it's not the best use case for them. They are still amazing. Like, for example, I love to use them for between packages. If you have a package that does something and you just want to have a hook so someone can listen to it and do something and react to something that happens, absolutely fine. But if it's something primary to your business logic, maybe ask yourself, at least. It might not be the best approach. Side work, fire and forget, like deleted a user, notify Google Analytics, send an email, whatever, fine. So just to summarize, a few things that we saw that didn't work. Endless controllers with everything in them, application scope creep, like an application that does too much with like 436 routes, with a database scope creep as well, because we have a ridiculous amount of table now. That doesn't work for us. Relying too much on static, try to be cautious with that. Static is good in a pure way, isolated, and be mindful of the state. The repository abstracting more than the data layer, I've seen that personally in other places. It doesn't work at all. And services doing too much can be a problem as well. Events for primary actions can be problematic to maintain long term, especially like Nuno Maduro was saying he's built pin curry with events, and looking at it, it was like I should have used the action pattern, like it would have saved me a lot of headaches. And yeah, low text coverage, but that's just a side note. It makes everything hard to maintain and refactor. So that's why every time I was referring to the testability of things. Takeaways, if you had to just remember one thing or a few things, it's just that readability is still important. The conventions can be important, and like try to have some and stick with them. And the low-level building blocks will help you to have maintainability across your code base. Most code is too complex. Try to keep things simple as long as you can, and just keep coding.